My name is Therese Templeton, though most people call me Tess. I am 66 years old, a retired librarian, and a widow of 7 years. Books once ordered my days, neat rows and careful catalogs, and I thought retirement would be gentler than this. That afternoon, I carried a cranberry orange loaf wrapped in parchment, the kind of bread I always baked for holidays, still warm in my hands. It was 2:17 p.m. on Thanksgiving when I paused in the hallway of my son's house and heard my daughter-in-law's voice, low and sharp. "When can we finally get rid of her?" The words sliced through me with a precision sharper than any knife. I froze, the loaf pressing against my chest like a shield, while laughter floated from the dining room. My breath caught, but I did not retreat. I straightened my back, opened the door, and walked into the party as if nothing had been said. On the surface, I was just another aging mother bringing bread. Inside, I was already writing the ending to her little plan. Moments like this, I've learned, are where life forks in two directions. One road bends toward silence and shrinking away. The other leads forward into the storm, armed only with dignity. If you're listening now, perhaps you know what it feels like when a single phrase shifts the ground beneath you. I ask you to stay with me, because what unfolded from that whisper was not only about betrayal, but about reclaiming strength in places I thought I had lost it. At the dining table, the lights glowed golden, polished silverware clinked, and glasses shone with reflections. My son Noah's voice rose in easy conversation. Guests leaned in, smiling. And Sloane, perfect hair pinned, her dress a studied shade of cranberry that almost mocked the loaf in my hands, caught sight of me. Surprise flickered across her face, then smoothed into a smile too sweet to be real. I moved toward the table, setting the loaf carefully on the counter, though no one turned to notice. My place card waited on a side table near the kitchen doorway, the letters smudged as if printed in haste. I took it without comment, though a small sting settled into my chest. I could still feel the echo of her words. When can we finally get rid of her? I pulled out my chair and sat down, smoothing my skirt and tucking my hands into my lap. My gaze swept the table and landed briefly on Lena, my 16-year-old granddaughter, her shoulders stiff, her eyes avoiding mine. Something passed there, quick as a shadow, but enough to lodge itself in my memory. In that instant, I made myself a promise. I would not crumble quietly. Life teaches librarians many lessons, and one of them is how to follow a trail. A whisper can be a beginning, a clue pressed between pages. And though I sat surrounded by family and neighbors, I began to trace the path forward, sketching in my mind how this story would not end the way Sloane imagined. For those listening, let me pause here. If you've ever been set aside, made to feel like the chair at the edge of the room or the voice too easy to ignore, you know the pull of silence, but you also know how deeply the soul resists being erased. This story is for you. If it stirs something inside, I invite you to stay until the end, to walk with me through humiliation, resolve, and something unexpected, a kind of healing I never thought possible. The hum of voices rose again, and I reached for my water glass, steadying my hand. Noah lifted his glass and spoke. To family. His words skimmed past me, as though family were a circle I no longer fit into. Yet I sat there anyway, the cranberry orange loaf cooling behind me, my spine straight, my ears still burning with Sloane's whisper. In that moment, I stopped being the guest who brought bread. I became the quiet author of a story whose final chapter would belong to me. And though they could not see it, I was already writing how it would end. I sat where they told me to sit. My place card had been tucked on the end of a folding table that pressed against the kitchen wall, near the trash bin. The thin cardstock bent under my fingertips, warped with faint water stains as if someone had set their drink on it before sliding it aside. The letters of my name were blurred, not crisp like the others at the polished oak dining table. It looked as though I had been written in last, an afterthought, or perhaps not meant to be there at all. I placed it carefully in front of my plate, though the damp corner curled upward, mocking me. The clatter of silverware and the glow of candles at the main table seemed far away. I could see Sloane laughing, leaning close to one of Noah's colleagues, her hand resting lightly on his sleeve in practiced charm. Noah nodded along, his smile easy, his attention caught in the rhythm of a world that no longer seemed to have space for me. Behind me, the cranberry-orange loaf sat untouched on the counter. Its fragrance of citrus and spice had followed me all afternoon while it baked, the same scent that had perfumed my kitchen on every holiday since Noah was a boy. I had imagined someone carving a slice, complimenting the texture, maybe even asking for the recipe written in my neat cursive. Instead, the foil crinkled quietly as it cooled, ignored. Plates of glossy pies and bakery cakes were passed hand to hand while my bread remained still, as though it carried no meaning at all. When Noah lifted his glass again, he said it louder this time. To family. The words echoed off the walls. Glasses clinked in unison. Smiles broke around the table, but not a single head turned toward me at my smaller seat. I raised my own glass anyway, the water lukewarm, the rim faintly chipped. My voice stayed in my throat. I swallowed both the water and the ache. I glanced toward Lena. She sat between her parents, her long hair hiding part of her face. When her eyes caught mine, she looked down swiftly, studying her plate as if the pattern of the china held secrets worth unraveling. My heart tightened at her avoidance. Children learn quickly where silence is safest, and in that moment I understood she had been taught not to stand too close to me. So I sat quietly, my napkin folded once, twice, until the corners lined perfectly. Years in the library had taught me that even in disorder there could be order, a small gesture of control. While the others laughed over anecdotes I was not invited to share, I cataloged this moment in my mind with painful clarity. The water-stained placard, the ignored loaf, the toast that left me invisible. Humiliation, I have discovered, rarely announces itself in shouts. It seeps in through smaller details, a warped card, a cooling loaf, a granddaughter's downcast eyes. These fragments pierced deeper than any confrontation could. They whispered a truth that I could no longer deny. I was being erased, gently, deliberately, until I would remain only as a burden they wished away. But humiliation is also a record. That day I began to keep one, not in ledgers or journals meant for others to see, but in the quiet corners of my memory. Every slight, every omission, every overheard phrase became an entry. Librarians understand preservation. I would preserve this, too. I lifted my fork and tasted the turkey, dry at the edges. Around me, conversation hummed, a language I was no longer fluent in. Still, I kept my back straight, my breath even, and the record forming silently inside me. I was being written out of their story, but I had already chosen to begin writing my own. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, I carried a small tin box from the top shelf of my closet down to the kitchen table. It was dented at the corners, the faded blue paint chipped from years of use, once filled with cookies when Noah was still a child. Over the years, it had become a vessel for papers I could not throw away. As I slid it open, the faint scent of old paper rose, comforting and sharp all at once. Inside, neatly folded in its envelope, lay the gift letter I had written nearly a decade ago. My handwriting was smaller then, steadier. The letter confirmed that I had given Noah and Sloane $78,500 for the down payment on their home. I had insisted the money was not a loan. No repayment expected, I had written. At the time, it felt like the right thing to do, a mother investing in her son's future, believing his new marriage deserved a foundation of stability. Attached was a copy of the deed, clean and crisp, bearing only two names, Noah Templeton and Sloane Avery Templeton. My name did not appear anywhere. not even as a footnote in the official lines. I traced the ink with my finger, and the absence spoke louder than any presence could. My sacrifice had been reduced to invisible ink. Beneath it, another paper slipped free, a note in my own hand. Loan to Noah, 10,000 January. There was no signature, no witness, just a mother's scrawl on a torn sheet of stationery. He had been so eager, standing in my kitchen, his eyes bright with the fire of his first startup. He told me it would be temporary, that investors were circling, that 10,000 was merely a seed. I had pressed the bills into his hand, proud of his ambition, never asking for a contract. A contract, after all, might have suggested I did not trust him. I closed my eyes and remembered his hug, the way he whispered, "You'll see, Mom." This will change everything. He had meant it. I believed him. But the startup had collapsed into dust, leaving behind creditors and debt collectors who now shadowed his steps. And me, with nothing but scraps of memory and a note no court would honor. The tin box lay open, its contents spread across the table like a story written without me. I realized then how completely I had stripped myself of any legal standing. Out of love, I had given everything without protecting myself. A librarian knows the importance of records, yet I had failed to record my own safety. I sat in silence, the refrigerator humming softly behind me. The gift letter, the deed, the forgotten loan, they were not just papers. They were evidence of how easily affection can be turned into erasure when no safeguard exists. I pressed the lid back onto the tin and pulled it close, resting my hands on top. For the first time, a different thought stirred in me. Not grief, not humiliation, but clarity. They might believe I had nothing left, no claim, no voice. But a woman who has cataloged thousands of lives in books knows that stories can be reorganized, records can be protected, and chapters can be rewritten, even late in the book. The night deepened, the house silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. I kept my hands on the tin, steadying myself. They thought I had given everything away, but I still had one thing they had forgotten: my will to begin again. The next afternoon, I found myself on the porch steps with Ruth Delgado, my neighbor of nearly 20 years. She had stopped by with a thermos of chamomile tea, her old nurse's habit of checking in on people still intact even after retirement. Her eyes, warm and knowing, studied me the way she once studied patients in the ER, searching for symptoms no one else bothered to notice. "You look tired, Tess," she said, handing me a steaming cup, "and not the kind of tired a nap fixes." I tried to deflect with a small laugh. "It's just the holiday. Too many people. Too much noise." But my voice wavered, and Ruth caught it instantly. She leaned back against the railing, her arms folded. I've seen that look before. It's the face of someone who gave too much and got back too little. The words cracked something open in me. I told her what had happened at Thanksgiving, the placard at the side table, the cranberry loaf cooling untouched, the whisper I'd overheard in the hallway. I spoke quietly, as though saying it too loud might make it all heavier than it already was. Ruth listened without interruption, her head tilted, her expression steady. When I finished, she set her cup down and said softly, "Tess, love isn't a contract. We give it because we want to, but when people start treating you like an obligation, it changes the balance. You have to decide where your line is." Her words lingered. Ruth rarely spoke in absolutes. Decades in emergency rooms had taught her that life didn't bend neatly into categories, but this time her voice held a firmness that could not be mistaken. She told me then about her own son, how he had once stolen a check from her purse and forged her signature. "I covered for him," she admitted, her voice low. "I told the bank it was my mistake. I thought if I saved him once, it would set him right. Instead, it taught him I was a well with no bottom. He came back again and again until there was nothing left but my anger." I looked at her, stunned. Ruth always seemed so unshakable, her life orderly, her routines intact, but even she had been undone by the people she loved. "What did you do?" I asked. "I cut the line," she said simply. "It nearly broke me, but I did it. I told him I wouldn't cover for him again. He hated me for it. But you know what? It forced him to face his mess. Now he pays his own bills. We talk again, but it's on new terms." The silence between us stretched, filled only by the sound of leaves skittering across the sidewalk. I thought of Noah's debts, the startup that had consumed my savings, the way Sloane's smile never reached her eyes. My hand tightened on the cup. Ruth reached into her purse and pulled out a folded slip of paper. She placed it on my knee. "This is the number of Eleanor Pike, elder law attorney. She doesn't waste time. If you're serious about protecting yourself, call her." I hesitated, the paper warm from her hand. I've never used a lawyer in my life. "Then maybe it's time," Ruth said gently. "You don't need someone to fight battles you don't have. You need someone to make sure your choices stand. Otherwise, they'll write your story for you." I stared at the slip of paper. A name, a phone number, nothing more. Yet it felt heavier than all the tin box of documents I had pored over the night before. For the first time in a long while, I felt something shift inside me. That evening, as I set the paper beside the phone, I whispered to myself, "Love may not be a contract, but it doesn't have to be a weapon against me either." When I first walked into Eleanor Pike's office, I felt the weight of every year I had lived pressing against my shoulders. The building itself was quiet, a former post office renovated into a tidy suite of law practices, its marble floor cool under my shoes. Eleanor greeted me at the door, a tall woman with silver hair swept neatly into a bun and eyes that carried the sharp clarity of someone who had seen too many families undone by silence. "Mrs. Templeton," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "Come in. Sit where you like." Her office smelled faintly of leather and peppermint. Bookshelves lined the walls, stacked with volumes of statutes and case law. But there was also a framed photo of her grandchildren, their grins reminding me of Lena's softer moments. I sat down, clutching the strap of my bag, unsure how to begin. Eleanor opened a yellow legal pad. "Your neighbor Ruth told me you might come. She said you've been overlooked for far too long." I nodded, my voice low. "I gave my son and his wife $78,000 to buy their house. I loaned him $10,000 more for a business that failed. Nothing is in writing. Nothing protects me. And now..." My throat tightened as I recalled Sloane's whisper. "Now they want me gone." Eleanor listened without blinking, her pen resting on the pad. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Mrs. Templeton, the law can't fix cruelty, but it can guard against exploitation. What you need is structure, clear, enforceable structure." She began outlining it in brisk strokes. A trust that would hold my assets, including my modest house, with me as the grantor and Lena as the primary beneficiary. A pour-over will to ensure that anything not already in the trust would flow into it seamlessly. Power of attorney for finances and healthcare proxy, so that no one could strip my decision-making if they tried to claim incompetence. And, perhaps most striking, a no-contest clause that would disinherit anyone who dared to challenge it. Her words cut through the fog that had clouded me for weeks. Each piece she described was like a rung on a ladder I could climb back onto, away from the humiliation of Thanksgiving. "A no-contest clause?" I asked. "That means if they try to fight it..." "They lose automatically," Eleanor said, her tone calm but final. "It is not cruelty, Mrs. Templeton. It is clarity. You are the one who decides how your life is written, not your daughter-in-law, not even your son. You." I sat very still, letting the words seep into me. For years I had thought strength meant endurance, bearing slights in silence. But what Eleanor offered was a different kind of strength. Quiet, precise, written into the bones of law. She handed me a form. There will be a capacity evaluation just to document your full mental fitness. It's routine, but essential. It prevents them from trying to say you didn't understand what you were doing. I thought of the placard by the trash, of Sloane's whisper, of Noah's tired eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. My voice was steady as I answered, "Schedule it. I want this done." Eleanor smiled, small but approving. "Good. Then let's begin." As I left her office, the air outside felt lighter, the winter sun glinting against the windows. For the first time in a long while, I was not simply reacting to what others did. To me, I was designing something of my own. 2 days later, I stepped into the polished lobby of Harbor Trust Bank, clutching my purse with both hands. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and roasted coffee from the kiosk near the entrance. Behind the glass doors stood Donna Yu, the branch manager Ruth had told me about. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s. Her navy suit pressed sharp, her eyes quick and alert like someone used to scanning details others overlooked. "Mrs. Templeton?" she asked warmly, extending her hand. "Ruth said you might need a little help sorting through your accounts." "Come in." We sat in her office, a narrow room with framed certificates on the wall and a pot of orchids on the desk. Dana pulled up my records on her computer, fingers tapping confidently across the keyboard. "You said you've noticed unusual activity," she asked. I hesitated, then explained what Eleanor had told me, that one of the first steps in protecting myself was to understand every corner of my finances. "I just want to be sure nothing has slipped past me," I said quietly. Dana nodded, her expression shifting into professional focus. "Let's take a look." As she scrolled through the logs, the green glow of the screen reflected off her glasses. "Here are your recent logins. This one is from your home computer, this one from your phone. But here..." She stopped, pointing at a line. "This login is different. It's from an IP address registered to a business hub across town. The device tag is..." "Let me check." She clicked a few times, then frowned. "Startup Hub, room 204. Do you know anyone who worked out of there?" The name chilled me. That was the exact address of the co-working space where Noah had launched his ill-fated company. Dana turned to me gently. "Mrs. Templeton, has your son ever had access to your online banking?" I swallowed, the answer bitter on my tongue. Years ago, when he was trying to set up automatic payments for his business, he said it would be temporary. I thought it was all removed. Dana leaned back, tapping her pen against the desk. "This login was 3 weeks ago. It looks like whoever it was didn't move money directly, but they did browse. Checking balances, transaction history. That kind of access can be dangerous." My chest tightened. It was one thing to hear Sloane whisper she wanted me gone, another to imagine Noah, my own son, quietly dipping into the shadows of my accounts. Dana's voice was steady. "I recommend we set up 2-factor authentication, new passwords, and a fraud alert. I'll flag this log for investigation. And Mrs. Templeton..." She paused, lowering her tone. "If this was your son, then it may not stop here." Debt creates desperation. Desperation leads people to act in ways they later regret. I looked down at my hands folded on my lap, the skin marked with lines and age spots. For years, those hands had signed checks, written notes, passed money across the table without question. Each gesture had been love, or what I thought was love. Now they trembled faintly, not from weakness but from recognition. "Please do it," I said firmly. "Secure everything." Dana gave a brisk nod. "Consider it done. And if anyone questions your capacity, you'll have a clear record showing you took these steps yourself." I left the bank with a folder of documents and a copy of the access log, the printout heavy in my bag. The winter air stung my cheeks, but I felt strangely awake. The whisper, the placard, the ignored loaf, those had been humiliations. This was different. This was evidence. and librarians know what evidence can do when the story reaches its turning point. It was late evening when the knock came, not a gentle tap, but a hard, impatient pounding that rattled the frame. I had been writing notes at my kitchen table, the tin box open beside me, when the sound jolted through the house. My pen rolled across the page, leaving a streak of ink like a scar. I rose slowly, my knees stiff, and walked toward the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see Sloane's silhouette, sharp shoulders, hair pinned tight. Her figure shifted as she raised her hand again, ready to strike the wood with that same force. "Tess!" she called, her voice pitched high with irritation. "We need to talk. You're becoming a liability. Do you hear me? A liability." The word echoed through the door, heavy and cruel. For a moment, I pressed my palm against the wood, feeling the vibration of her words. A part of me wanted to open it, to ask how a woman who had once eaten at my table, laughed at my jokes, accepted my gift of money and trust, could now stand outside my home, spitting the word liability at me. But another part of me, the part Eleanor had woken, the part Dana had fortified, knew silence could be stronger than any reply. So I stepped back, leaving her voice to fall against the closed door. The pounding came again, sharper this time. You can't just sit in there like you matter. We're trying to hold things together, and you're standing in the way. Do you understand? You're in the way. I didn't move. My breath was steady, though my heart raced. The house felt smaller, the walls holding the tension like a drum. From across the street, I noticed the faint glow of Ruth's porch light flick on. Curtains shifted. She had heard it too. Sloane's tone turned into a hiss. "Don't make this harder. Noah has enough pressure already. Stop pretending you're the center of this family. You're not." Her words slid under the door like smoke, but still I said nothing. I returned to the table, sat down, and opened my journal. My pen found the page again, and in steady letters I wrote, "Tonight she came to my door. She called me a liability. Ruth heard it." The knocks quieted, replaced by a frustrated exhale. Through the glass, I watched Sloane's shape pull back, her heels striking the walkway as she retreated. A car door slammed, then silence settled over the neighborhood again. I sat with the journal open, the ink drying on the page. Each entry was more than memory now. It was record. It was proof. It was the quiet preparation for what I knew was coming. In the distance, Ruth's curtain fell back into place. I felt less alone. Even if Sloane thought she had cornered me, I was not invisible anymore, not to myself, not to those who were watching. I closed the journal, pressed my hand against the cover, and whispered into the stillness, "I will not open that door. Not tonight. Not ever on her terms." The following Saturday, the sky hung low and gray, a curtain of winter clouds pressing against the rooftops. I had just returned from the market, my tote bag heavy with apples and a loaf of rye, when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. The name on the screen made my breath hitch. Lena. Her messages were rare, usually short and polite, the kind a teenager sent out of obligation. But this time, the words glowed differently. "Can I come by?" "Alone." I typed back, "Of course. Anytime." Not 20 minutes later, I heard the hesitant crunch of sneakers on the path. When I opened the door, Lena stood there, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her hands buried deep in the pockets of her denim jacket. Her eyes darted toward the street before finally meeting mine. "Hi, Grandma," she whispered, her voice thin but steady. "Come in, love," I said, stepping aside. She slipped through the doorway, pulling the hood of her sweatshirt down. I guided her to the kitchen, where the kettle was already humming. She perched on the edge of a chair, tapping her fingers nervously against her knees. For a long moment, silence stretched between us. Finally, she lifted her eyes, and I saw the turmoil swimming there. "I heard Mom the other night," she said, her words tumbling out. "I heard what she called you." My chest tightened, remembering the venom behind the word liability. I waited, not wanting to interrupt. "She says things about you all the time," Lena continued, her voice cracking, "that you're too much, that you're holding us back. But she's wrong." Her hands clenched together on the table. "I don't care what she says. I choose you." The words landed with a weight that dissolved something in me. My throat thickened, tears pricking my eyes. I reached across the table, laying my hand gently over hers. Her fingers were cold, but they squeezed mine with fierce strength. "You're my grandmother," she whispered. "You've always been there." I still remember when you helped me with my first art project, how you showed me how to mix colors until it looked like the sunset. Mom doesn't get it, but I do. I'll never stop choosing you. I pulled open the drawer beside me and took out a faded Polaroid I kept tucked under the cutlery tray. It showed Lena at 6 years old, standing in my garden, paintbrush in hand, streaks of blue across her cheeks. Her smile was wide and unguarded. I slid it across the table. "Do you remember this?" I asked. She laughed softly, the sound breaking the heaviness in the room. "I thought if I painted my face, I'd look like the sky." "You did," I said, smiling, "and you still shine just like it." Her shoulders eased, the tension melting a little. I poured tea into 2 mugs, and we sat together in the quiet warmth of the kitchen. Outside, the clouds pressed closer, but inside there was a fragile kind of light. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt hope threading through the silence. One small voice breaking away from the weight of others had found its way to me. Lena had chosen me, not out of duty, not out of pity, but out of love. As she left later that afternoon, she paused at the door, slipping the Polaroid into her pocket. "Keep writing everything down," she said softly. "One day they'll have to listen." I watched her walk down the path, her figure small against the gray street. My heart, once heavy, carried a steady flame. Whatever storm lay ahead, I was not entirely alone. On Sunday afternoon, I drove to St. Mark's Chapel, a modest brick church nestled between 2 bare oak trees. The wind carried the smell of wood smoke from nearby chimneys, and the bell tower chimed as I pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, the sanctuary was hushed, filled with the faint scent of wax and the soft echo of footsteps across stone. Sister Anya Brooks waited for me in the small adjoining room where she kept her books and journals. She rose when she saw me, her gray habit simple, her smile warm but marked by the same years that had settled into the lines on my own face. We had been friends once, when our children were young, when our lives still felt as though they were unfolding rather than narrowing. Time and distance had scattered us, but her presence remained steady, like a bookmark I could return to when I needed to remember where I left off. We sat across from each other, a small pot of tea steaming between us. She studied me for a moment, her eyes kind but sharp. "You look weighed down, Tess." Heavier than the years alone should account for, I told her what had happened. Thanksgiving, the placard, the whisper in the hallway, the pounding at my door. I told her about Ruth's advice and Eleanor's trust. She listened, hands folded, her breath slow and measured, as though she was counting each word for its worth. When I finished, I asked the question that had been circling me in the dark hours of the night. "How do you forgive people who see you as nothing more than an obstacle?" Her eyes softened, and she leaned forward slightly. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting, Tess. It isn't erasing the harm or pretending it never happened. Forgiveness is deciding where your boundary lies and refusing to let their cruelty define you. It is not letting them rewrite your worth." I frowned. "But if I forgive, don't I let them win?" Anya shook her head. "No, you let yourself win. You stop drinking the poison they serve. You refuse to live inside their bitterness. Forgiveness isn't for them. It's for you. It gives you the freedom to protect yourself without hate chaining you down." Her words stirred something inside me, though part of me resisted. The hurt was still raw, still fresh. Yet as I looked into her face, lined with years of carrying other people's burdens, I felt a small shift. She was not asking me to excuse what Sloane had done. She was asking me to reclaim the part of myself that Sloane had no right to touch. Anya reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out a small leather journal worn at the edges. She set it gently in my hands. When you feel the weight pressing in, write it here. Write what happened, write what you feel, and then mark where your boundary is. That way, the story belongs to you, not to them. I traced the cover with my fingertips, the leather soft and pliable. My own journal at home already bore entries of humiliation and resolve, but this felt like a place to define myself differently, not just as the victim of erasure, but as the guardian of my own lines. When I rose to leave, the bell outside chimed again. Anya touched my arm and said, "Forgive by standing firm. Forgive by refusing to vanish. That is how you protect the sacred ground of your life." As I stepped back into the cold air, the wind sharp against my face, I felt lighter. Forgiveness did not mean surrender. It meant I would no longer waste myself carrying their disdain. It meant that when the next confrontation came, and I knew it would, I could stand without being hollowed out. That night, the house seemed larger than it had in years. The walls creaked with the cold, the furnace hummed in the basement, but still the silence pressed down like a weight. I sat in the living room with the lights turned off, only the dim glow from the street lamps spilling through the blinds. On the table before me stood the framed photograph of my husband, Daniel. His smile was the same as it had always been, calm, reassuring, a hint of mischief in his eyes. I reached out, tracing the glass with a trembling finger. "They want to erase me, Daniel," I whispered. My voice broke against the stillness. At Thanksgiving, I heard it in her voice. She said, "When can we finally get rid of her? And our son..." He didn't stop her. He didn't even notice. The photograph stared back, unchanging, while I fought the lump in my throat. "Do you know what it feels like? To be in a room with your family and realize you are invisible? To sit with a placard that looks like trash, while the bread you baked with care cools behind you untouched?" Tears slipped down my cheeks. I had held them in for days, but here in the dark, there was no one to impress with strength. I pressed both hands to my face, letting the grief pour out. I tried to do everything right. I gave them the money for their house. I loaned Noah what he needed for his dream. I never asked for repayment, never wrote a contract, because I believed love was enough. But love doesn't seem to count anymore. Not with them. The clock ticked steadily on the mantel, each second like a heartbeat. I folded forward, resting my forehead against my hands. I'm so tired of being humiliated in my own son's home. So tired of being called a burden, a liability. I can't carry this much longer. For a moment, the temptation to give up nearly swallowed me, to let them have their way, to retreat quietly into a corner of the world until I faded completely. But then my eyes lifted again to Daniel's photo. His face, frozen in that familiar half-smile, reminded me of the nights when we used to talk long past midnight, making plans for a future we thought would be long and steady. He had never once let anyone tell him he was less than he was. He had never let me believe I was either. I took a shaky breath. If you were here, you'd tell me to get up. You'd tell me to stop crying and start acting. You'd tell me dignity doesn't come from what others hand you. It comes from what you refuse to let them take. The tears slowed. I pressed the heel of my hand against my chest, where the ache lingered but did not consume me. My whisper grew steadier. They think they can write me out of the story. But I will not let them. I will not be erased. The furnace clicked again, sending a wave of warmth through the vent. I lifted the journal Sister Anya had given me and opened it to a blank page. In bold, deliberate strokes, I wrote, Tonight I almost gave in, but I will not. I will rise. Closing the book, I leaned back in my chair, the photograph still watching over me. The pain was real, but beneath it something stronger pulsed, resolve, faint but steady, like an ember waiting to be fanned into flame. "Rest easy, Daniel," I whispered to the shadows. "I'll take it from here." The next morning, the winter light spilled pale across my kitchen table. I set the tin recipe box in front of me, the same box that once held scraps of cardstock and index cards from my years at the library. Over time, it had become a home for the things that mattered: handwritten recipes, tucked notes, scraps of my life folded into neat corners. My hands shook slightly as I sorted through them. Lemon bars, chicken soup, cranberry orange loaf written in my best cursive. Each card held the weight of memory, the echo of family dinners when my presence still meant something. Slowly, I pulled out a blank white card. Its surface was unmarked, crisp, as if waiting for a story not yet told. On it, in firm strokes, I wrote 6 words. "The rest is meant for me." I placed the card on top of the stack, then closed the lid with a final snap. The sound rang through the kitchen louder than I expected, final and sharp. I slipped the box into a padded envelope, the same kind used to send books through the interlibrary loan years ago, and addressed it to Noah and Sloan. As I sealed it, a kind of stillness came over me. This was no longer just a recipe box. It was a symbol, a statement that whatever I had given freely before, I was done handing over pieces of myself without protection. I carried the package to the post office, the cold air biting at my cheeks. The clerk weighed it, slapped on the postage, and sent it down the conveyor belt. My chest ached as I watched it disappear from sight, but under the ache there was clarity. That evening, as the sky turned violet and lamps lit in the houses across the street, my phone buzzed. A message glared up from the screen. What does this mean? It was from Sloan. Another followed quickly. Are you trying to be dramatic? And then, you don't get to decide when you're finished. We do. I set the phone down without replying. For years I had scrambled to explain myself, to soften edges, to prove my place in a family that no longer wanted me. But tonight, silence was my answer. The recipe box was gone from my shelf, mailed away. The empty space it left behind felt startling at first, a gap in the familiar order of my kitchen. But as I stood there, hands resting on the cleared spot, I realized the emptiness was not loss. It was room for what came next, room for me to breathe without their shadow pressing in. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway for a moment longer, listening to the hush of the house. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt chosen. The knock at the door this time was softer, not the pounding of Sloan, but a tentative rhythm, almost apologetic. When I opened it, Noah stood there, his shoulders slumped beneath his winter coat, his hands shoved into his pockets. For a moment, I saw not the grown man with streaks of gray at his temples, but the boy who used to trail behind me in the grocery store, tugging at my sleeve, asking for cookies. "Can I come in, Mom?" His voice was low, strained. I stepped aside. He entered slowly, glancing around as though the walls themselves might accuse him. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where he had once spread out homework assignments, where he had pleaded for that first $10,000 loan years ago. The silence stretched until it threatened to smother us both. Finally, he exhaled. "I need to tell you something before Sloan twists it." The startup. It's worse than I let on. My hands folded over one another in my lap. "How bad is it, Noah?" He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. $250,000. That's what I owe. I signed personal guarantees with the bank, and the creditors won't back off. Sloan's panicked. "We'll lose the house." His voice cracked. "She thinks if we cut ties with you, it'll protect us. That's why. She's been..." He stopped, dragging a hand through his hair. That's why she says the things she says. The words landed heavy, but they were not surprising. I had seen it coming. The desperation behind the log-in at the bank, the way their laughter at Thanksgiving rang hollow. Still, hearing the number spoken aloud made my stomach clench. I gave you $78,000 for that house, I said quietly. I loaned you $10,000 more for the business. And now you tell me I'm the liability? His head snapped up, shame flickering across his face. I know, Mom. I know what you've done for me. But Sloane's scared. She thinks you'll drag us under if people realize you're vulnerable. The word stung, though he hadn't meant it to wound. Vulnerable. As though I were a cracked window threatening to shatter and bring the roof down with me. I leaned forward, my voice steady. What drags a family under is dishonesty. What destroys trust is erasing the hands that held you up. You both want me gone, not because I'm a burden, but because I remind you of what you owe. He flinched, and for a moment the boy was back again, caught in a lie about broken glass or a missing allowance. I never wanted this, he whispered. I thought I could fix it before you found out. I thought I could protect you from the mess. Tears burned at the back of my eyes, but I held them back. You can't protect me by erasing me, Noah. You protect me by standing beside me, and you protect yourself by facing the truth. The clock ticked between us, each second marking the distance we had yet to cross. He lowered his head into his hands. I don't know if I can fix this. You can start by not letting Sloane dictate who I am in this family, I said softly. I am your mother. I will not be erased. He didn't answer, but his silence was different this time. Less avoidance, more the silence of a man facing a reckoning he could no longer delay. When he finally stood to leave, he paused in the doorway. His back was to me, but his voice carried a faint tremor. I'm sorry, Mom. The door closed, and I sat alone at the table, my hands pressed flat against the wood. The confession had cut deep, but beneath the wound was clarity. Now I knew the full shape of the storm, and knowing gave me strength. The following week I sat once more in Eleanor Pike's office. The winter sun streamed through the tall windows, striping her desk with bands of pale light. In front of me lay a neat stack of documents, each clipped with precision, the ink fresh from her printer. My hands rested calmly in my lap, but inside I felt the gravity of what I was about to do. Eleanor slid the first page toward me. This is the trust declaration, she explained. It names you as grantor and trustee. Upon your passing, Lena becomes the primary beneficiary. Harbor House will also receive a portion. Exactly as you requested, I scanned the page, the words crisp and undeniable. My name appeared again and again, not as a footnote, not as an afterthought, but as the anchor of every clause. The pour-over will, Eleanor continued, tapping the next document. Anything not specifically included in the trust will pour into it automatically. That way, nothing falls through the cracks. She handed me another. Here is the durable power of attorney and healthcare proxy. You've named no one from your immediate family, by choice. This ensures no one can claim control over your finances or medical care. I nodded. Each step was another stone laid firmly in the path I had chosen. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. And finally, the no contest clause. If anyone contests your trust or your will, they are automatically disinherited. They walk away with nothing. The words settled over the room like iron. I thought of Sloane's whisper in the hallway, her fists against my door, her texts dripping with disdain. I thought of Noah's weary eyes, his confession of crushing debt. And then I thought of Lena, slipping that Polaroid into her pocket, whispering, I choose you. My hand did not tremble as I picked up the pen. I'm ready, I said. Eleanor nodded to the notary waiting quietly in the corner. With deliberate strokes, I signed each page. My name flowed across the paper, steady and sure, leaving no room for erasure. When the last page was complete, Eleanor gathered the stack into a folder and closed it firmly. "It's done. From this moment, your wishes are protected. And Tess..." She met my eyes, her expression softening. "If they try to break you in court, they'll discover the trap you've set. You are stronger than they realize." Before I left, she handed me a sealed envelope. "This is a letter of notice. Send it to Noah and Sloan. It warns them that any attempt to contest your decisions will void their claims entirely. It's not cruelty, it's foresight." That evening at my kitchen table, I addressed the envelope in my careful librarian script. Sliding it into the mailbox, I felt a quiet surge in my chest. For years I had given without protection, loved without condition, endured without boundaries. Now the balance had shifted. The trap was not vengeance. It was law. It was order. It was the proof that I had not vanished, that I could still decide how my story would unfold. As I closed the mailbox, the winter wind bit at my cheeks, but it no longer felt like punishment. It felt like clarity. The papers were signed, sealed, and alive in the world. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I walked back into my house not as someone erased, but as someone restored. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and polished brass, the kind of place where time seemed to gather in the corners. I walked in with Eleanor Pike at my side, her briefcase swinging like a sword she knew how to wield. Ruth sat 2 rows back, her hands folded tight in her lap, her presence a steady reminder that I was not walking into this battle alone. Lena had wanted to come, but I told her to stay at school. Some burdens are too heavy for young shoulders. The bailiff called the session to order, and Judge Miriam Kent entered, her black robe flowing, her eyes sharp and measured. She settled into her chair, scanning the courtroom with a gaze that missed nothing. To one side sat Sloan, immaculate in a navy suit, her lips pressed thin, her hand clutching Noah's arm like a tether. Noah's face was pale, his jaw tight, sweat visible at his temple. The petition lay on the judge's desk, a request to declare me incompetent, to place me under guardianship so Noah and Sloan could manage my affairs. A polite way of saying, erase her, take her choices, strip her life until nothing remains. Eleanor rose first, her voice firm and clear. She called Dr. Howard Ames to the stand. He adjusted his glasses, unfolded his notes, and spoke with the authority of decades in geriatrics. "Mrs. Templeton is fully competent," he said. "Her memory, judgment, and reasoning are intact. I evaluated her personally, and she understands the nature and consequences of her decisions." Sloan shifted in her seat, her smile brittle. Next, Dana Yu from Harbor Trust stepped forward. She placed a series of printed logs on the evidence table. "These are records of unauthorized access to Mrs. Templeton's accounts," she explained. The device was traced to a co-working hub once leased by Mr. Noah Templeton's failed startup. The pattern shows intent to monitor her finances without her consent. I kept my gaze on Noah, his shoulders hunched, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Then came Ruth, steady and calm. She told the court what she had overheard. Sloan pounding at my door, calling me a liability. Her voice carried the weight of a nurse who had testified in emergencies before, firm, unswerving. "It was loud enough for the neighborhood to hear," she said, "and I heard every word." Finally, Eleanor handed forward my journals, pages of careful notes, each dated, each describing the whispers, the placard, the door that shook beneath Sloan's fist. The words lay there like quiet witnesses, undeniable in their consistency. The courtroom air grew heavy. Judge Kent adjusted her glasses, her expression hardening. "Mrs. Templeton has built a clear record of what she has endured," she said. But it was Noah who broke the silence. His voice cracked as he leaned toward the microphone. "She was never supposed to know about the bank," he muttered. "Sloan told me to check her balances, to make sure we could still cover the debt before we pushed her out. The words hung in the air like a bell tolling the end of pretense. The courtroom gasped. Sloane's hand flew from his arm, her face twisting into fury. "Noah!" she hissed, but it was too late. Judge Kent struck her gavel. "That will be enough." Her voice was iron. "The petition for guardianship is denied. Mrs. Templeton is of sound mind, and this court will not be used as a weapon to strip her dignity. Mrs. Sloane Templeton, your conduct borders on coercion and fraud. I strongly advise you to reconsider your path forward." The gavel came down again, final and sharp. The case was dismissed. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, my spine straight. The storm had broken, but I did not need to gloat or shout. The law had spoken. The truth had been dragged into the light, not by me forcing it, but by Noah's own slip of tongue. As we left the courtroom, Eleanor touched my arm. "You held your ground," she said quietly. "Now they know you cannot be erased." Outside, the cold air felt different, crisp, alive, no longer heavy with dread. For the first time in years, I felt the warmth of justice settle around me like a cloak. The snow had begun to melt into slush when I met Peter Albright on the front porch of my house. He stamped his boots on the mat, his cheeks flushed from the cold, a clipboard tucked beneath his arm. His expression carried both the sharp efficiency of a real estate agent and the quiet compassion of a man who had seen too many families fracture over property lines. "Are you sure about this, Tess?" he asked gently as I let him in. "You've lived here for more than 30 years. I nodded, though my throat tightened as I looked around the familiar rooms. The scent of books still lingered in the study, and the faint grooves in the hardwood marked where Noah had once raced toy cars in endless loops. Every wall carried shadows of a life I had carefully tended. Yet instead of feeling trapped in nostalgia, I felt something new. Choice. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "This house was built for a family that no longer gathers here. I need something smaller, something that's mine alone. Selling isn't losing, it's choosing." Peter studied me, then gave a slow nod. "That's the clearest answer I've heard all week." We walked through the rooms together, his pen scratching notes. In the kitchen, I paused at the counter where the cranberry orange loaf had once cooled. Ignored. The memory still stung, but now it felt like a closed chapter. I touched the smooth surface of the counter, whispered goodbye, and turned away. In the living room, Peter pointed out the light filtering through the bay window. "This will show beautifully in photos." Houses like this don't stay on the market long. I followed him from room to room, each step a quiet shedding. The dining room where I had once set placards with care, the hallway where laughter used to echo, even the small closet at the top of the stairs where Daniel had hidden Lena's Christmas gifts. The memories rose and settled again, bitter-sweet but no longer heavy. Back at the kitchen table, Peter spread out the paperwork. "With your signature, I'll list it this week. We'll price it. Fairly, enough to honor the home's worth, not so high it lingers." I picked up the pen, my fingers steady. The ink flowed across the page, not with grief, but with finality. When I set the pen down, a quiet relief filled me. The house would move on to someone new, and so would I. "Where will you go?" Peter asked, collecting the papers. "A small apartment downtown," I replied, "close to the library near Harbor House. I want to wake up and know that every corner belongs to me, not to memories of who I used to be in someone else's story." He smiled, closing his folder. "Then you've already won, Tess." As he left, I stood at the window, watching his car disappear down the street. The house around me seemed to exhale, its weight lifting. For the first time in decades, the walls no longer held me in place. They were simply walls. I turned back toward the empty kitchen, the echo of my footsteps steady. Selling was not surrender. Selling was freedom. The apartment was small, but it welcomed me like a fresh page. The walls were painted cream, the windows overlooked a quiet street, and the kitchen, though narrow, glowed with warmth when I simmered a pot of soup on the stove. On that first Sunday evening, the scent of bread and thyme filled the air as I set out bowls on the modest oak table I had brought with me. Ruth arrived first, carrying a basket of apples. "Your new place suits you," she said, setting them down. "It feels lighter." Not long after, Sister Anya came with a jar of honey and a smile that softened the lines on her face. "This kitchen has a heart," she murmured, running her hand over the counter. "You can feel it." Then Lena slipped inside, clutching a sketch pad against her chest. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair pulled back loosely, a pencil tucked behind her ear. She smelled faintly of paint and turpentine, the way she always did when she had been working on her art. "Grandma," she said, her eyes bright, "I made something for you." She opened the sketch pad and turned it around. On the page was a careful drawing of a log cabin quilt, each square shaded in colors that blended warm reds and cool blues. At the very center, she had drawn a golden square. "That's the hearth square," she explained. "In quilting, it stands for home. I put it in the middle because you're still holding us together, even if the house is gone." My throat tightened as I traced the pencil lines with my eyes. "It's beautiful, Lena." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of fabric, her first attempt at sewing the quilt itself. Crooked stitches ran along the seams, but the center square shone, bright and deliberate. She placed it in my hands and whispered, "You're in the middle, Grandma." "I'm sewing the rest around you." I pressed the fabric to my chest, the stitches uneven but full of love. Around us, the soup bubbled, the bread cooled on the counter, and the women who had stood beside me filled the room with quiet laughter. We sat down together, passing bowls and slices of bread, the table alive with warmth that had nothing to do with bloodlines or obligation. Ruth told a story from her nursing days, making us all laugh until tears gathered at the corners of our eyes. Anya spoke about the resilience she had seen in people who chose to live with boundaries rather than bitterness. And Lena leaned her head against my shoulder, her sketch pad open beside her, pencil moving swiftly across the page as she captured the scene. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt at peace, not erased, not invisible, but whole. The log cabin square lay beside my plate, a reminder that family can be chosen, built stitch by stitch, through loyalty and love. As the evening deepened, I looked around the table. Here was my true circle. Here was the proof that I was not alone. A year later, Thanksgiving looked very different. I no longer walked up the steps of Noah's house carrying bread no one wanted. Instead, I stood in the bustling dining hall of Harbor House, a long wooden table stretched across the room, lined with bowls of soup, baskets of rolls, and trays of roasted vegetables. Volunteers moved between chairs, pouring coffee, sharing stories, laughter rising like a hymn. The air was alive with warmth, not the brittle politeness I had once endured, but genuine belonging. On the wall, a newspaper article had been pinned under glass. It bore my name, praising the donation I had made through the trust, the way I had supported Harbor House in expanding their community kitchen. The headline read, "Retired Librarian's Quiet Gift Keeps Neighbors Fed." People stopped to read it, nodding with appreciation, clapping me on the shoulder as they passed. I smiled, not out of pride, but because the truth was no longer hidden in a corner. At the head of the long table, I laid down something I had carried with me all year, the water-stained place card from that dreadful Thanksgiving. Only now, it was pressed flat and laminated, the edges sealed in clear plastic. I placed it in the center of the wood, no longer a symbol of humiliation, but of survival. What had once marked me as invisible now stood as proof that I could not be erased. Lena slipped into the chair beside me, her cheeks flushed from helping serve soup. She leaned close, her voice just for me. "I still choose you, Grandma." her words wrapped around me like the log cabin quilt she had nearly finished, each square stitched with care, the golden hearth in the center glowing. Across the room, Ruth and Sister Anya laughed together, ladling out stew. Children darted between chairs. Strangers shared bread as though they had known each other for years. It was everything family was meant to be, honest, imperfect, alive. I glanced once at the folded newspaper on the counter, knowing that somewhere Sloane had read it too. She would have seen the photographs, the smiling faces gathered. Around me, the words honoring what she had tried to erase. In her circles, she would be forced to acknowledge what she had done, her ambition now tangled in shame. That was karma, not dramatic, not cruel, but undeniable. I lifted my cup of cider, the steam rising into the air, and looked down the long table at the people gathered. The laminated placard glimmered under the light, transformed from a symbol of rejection into a testament of endurance. This was my Thanksgiving now, not bitter, not erased, but whole. I had taken what was meant to break me and built a home from it. And as Lena rested her head lightly on my shoulder, whispering once more, "I still choose you," I knew the story had ended exactly as I had written it, quietly, firmly, and in full.